Imagine for a moment that between the vast sky and the deep human consciousness there exists a bridge not built of stone or steel, but of light, of pure energy, of ancient wisdom. This bridge does not merely connect two distant worlds, it invites us to cross it, to discover the wonders and secrets that await us on the other side. At this very moment, you are about to embark on a unique journey, one that has the power to transform your life and your way of understanding the universe. Welcome to A Bridge Between Heaven and Consciousness, the Science of Prayer, a work that is not simply a book, but an experience that will open before you the doors to deep knowledge, a knowledge that, although timeless, resonates with the truth of our most essential being. Through the words of Emmet Fox, we will journey to the heart of prayer, unveiling the mysteries of the human mind and its capacity to manifest the divine. Fox, with his unique vision and illuminating wisdom, will lead us to understand that prayer is not just an act of devotion, but a precise science, a bridge capable of connecting us to the infinite, the eternal, and the sublime. Throughout these pages, you will discover that prayer is not just a whisper to the sky, but a profound process of internal transformation, where the mind and heart align with the universal laws. The science behind prayer reveals an ancient and powerful truth, that we are all capable of influencing the reality around us, using the power of our consciousness connected to the divine. So close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and prepare to take the first step on this spiritual journey. What is to come is not just an awakening, but a revelation. For as you cross this bridge between heaven and consciousness, you will enter a realm where the impossible becomes possible, and where, through the science of prayer, you will find the key to unlocking the deepest secrets of your soul. This is your moment. The bridge awaits you. From the dawn of humanity, prayer has been the most natural yet most misunderstood resource of the human soul. People pray in temples and in the silence of their hearts. They pray out of necessity, gratitude, habit, or desperation. But in most cases, they pray without knowing what they are truly doing, and that ignorance has turned prayer into an empty plea, a mechanical act, a fragile hope cast into the wind, perhaps expecting that a distant God will hear and grant their request. However, true prayer is not a petition, it is alignment. It is not a plea to a capricious power, but a communion with the living law of the universe. The act of praying, when understood from its spiritual and mental root, is the highest form of conscious action. It is the affirmation of invisible good, the recognition of the presence of God here and now, the exercise of the mind in harmony with the divine mind. And that is why, when prayer is done correctly, results do not take long to manifest, not as a miraculous response to an emotional request, but as the natural effect of an activated mental and spiritual cause. Many believe that prayer is talking to God, but this is only true if we understand that God is not outside, distant, or separate from the one who prays. God is the life that sustains life, the love that shapes everything, the intelligence that permeates every cell, every atom, every thought. Therefore, to pray is to come into contact with that eternal reality, with that field of perfection that does not need to be persuaded, but rather accepted. And that acceptance takes place in consciousness. There is no prayer more powerful than a shift in consciousness. When thought rises above appearances, when the soul declares the truth even if form says otherwise, when the mind aligns with the eternal rather than the transient, then one has prayed in spirit, and that prayer works because it obeys the law. The mental law is clear. Every thought sustained with faith and emotion manifests, not because we wish it to, but because it was established that way from the beginning. God does not punish or reward based on whim. He simply responds, as a living principle, to the vibration we emit. Just as electricity does not discriminate who uses it, the law of prayer does not distinguish between the wise and the ignorant, believers and skeptics. It operates with unwavering fidelity when activated correctly. The problem is not that God does not hear, but that most people pray from confusion, fear, or resentment, and this, instead of attracting the solution, sustains the problem. To pray is not to dwell on what is lacking, but to focus on the fullness that already exists. It is not to speak of the problem, but to affirm the truth that transcends it. It is not to repeat phrases like empty formulas, but to fill the mind with luminous and true thoughts, impregnated with divine substance. A prayer is not measured by its length or by the emotional intensity with which it is cried out to the heavens, but by the purity of thought and the clarity of intention. That is why prayer is a science, and like any science, it has principles, laws, and methods. Good intentions are not enough. One must know what they are doing. Scientific prayer does not depend on location, posture, language, or tradition. It depends solely on one thing: the state of consciousness from which it is issued. A true word, spoken from spiritual understanding, is more powerful than 1,000 mechanically recited litanies. A statement infused with faith and mental comprehension can transform illness into health, chaos into order, anguish into peace. And this is not superstition, it is law. This book is a living, clear, and practical exploration of the true power of prayer, not to repeat what has already been said, but to delve into the spiritual and mental mechanics of this sacred act. Here, principles will be revealed that, if applied, will change the way you relate to God, to yourself, and to the world. Each chapter is a key, an expansion of consciousness, a guide to applying prayer as a tool for immediate transformation, not to wait for something from heaven, but to remember that heaven is already within you. Because to pray is to awaken, to pray is to accept, to pray is to create. And when you learn to pray from the truth, you will see how everything begins to align, to organize, to flow, not because God has changed, but because you have finally remembered how to enter His kingdom, a bridge between heaven and consciousness. The Science of Prayer, Emmet Fox. We have noticed that more than 90% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by pressing the subscribe button and giving the video a like. Thank you for inspiring us to continue creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to transform your life? Chapter 1. Scientific Prayer, Beyond Supplication and Tradition. Most people, when they think of prayer, imagine urgent pleas, lamentations rising with uncertain hope, and fervent supplications directed at a distant and sometimes silent power. Prayer is often believed to be about pleading with enough fervor, tears, or insistence, hoping that God's will change. However, this view, though widespread for centuries, is a distortion of spiritual truth. God does not need to be convinced, moved, or persuaded. God is principle, law, and love in perpetual action. That is why true prayer has nothing to do with supplication, habit, or mechanical repetition. Scientific prayer is different entirely. It is the conscious recognition that good is already given and only needs to be accepted in the mind to manifest in form. It is the understanding that the universe is sustained by immutable laws that respond to thought, not to cries. What is sustained mentally and emotionally in alignment with truth becomes concrete experience. To pray scientifically is to use the mind as an instrument of creation, not of dependence. It is not about repeating words out of habit, but declaring from understanding. It is not about informing God of your problems, for God already knows the deepest truth of your being, but about aligning yourself with His perfect vision of you. The spiritual principle is clear. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Prayer is the supreme act of directed, elevated thought, sustained with authentic emotion, certainty, and intelligent faith. Jesus, the great master of scientific prayer, never prayed like the men of his time. He did not cry out to the heavens, use complicated words, or kneel in anguish to beg. Jesus affirmed, declared, blessed, and gave thanks. When he prayed, he did so with the certainty that good was already present. Father, I thank you because you have heard me. He said this before the miracle occurred. That is the attitude of the scientific prayer practitioner, praying not to ask, but to give thanks for what already exists in the spiritual realm. Prayer is not a bridge between a needy human and a reluctant God. It is the affirmation of the indivisible unity between the soul and its source. Scientific prayer is based on an essential principle. God is absolute good, and that good is inexhaustible, universal, and present here and now. God cannot deny health, peace, provision, or love, because God is those things in their purest essence. What prevents that good from manifesting is not any lack in God, but an obstruction in human consciousness. Therefore, to pray is to clear consciousness. It is to restore clear vision. It is to tune in with what is already perfect. We do not pray to change God's mind. We pray to change our own. And that change is so profound that it modifies personal energy, alters mental vibration, and reorganizes external conditions in alignment with the new inner state. That is true prayer, a creative act, a co-creative act with the divine mind. Now, if prayer is creation, then prayer must be accompanied by essential elements: clarity, intention, feeling, faith, understanding. A prayer launched from doubt bears no fruit. A statement spoken without conviction has no roots. A word spoken in fear does not produce miracles. That is why, before praying scientifically, you must first enter a state of calm. Remember who you are, with whom you are aligning, and what truth you are declaring. God will not respond because you beg with tears. He will respond, and in fact He already has, when you think as He thinks, when you declare good as an accomplished fact, when you recognize in the invisible what you desire to see in the visible, when you replace supplication with recognition and lament with gratitude, when instead of telling God about your problems, you declare God's presence to your problems. Scientific prayer is not arrogance, it is spiritual humility. It is saying, I do not know how to solve this, but I know that God has already solved all things. That is why I quiet myself, I recognize, I affirm, and I trust. And then forms change, not by magic, but by law, because the universe responds to mental order, and mental order is born from a consciousness that knows it is united with its source. This is the beginning of true prayer. This is the start of the path of spiritual science. And from here, all transformation is possible, because when you stop praying like one who asks and begin praying like one who knows, the kingdom begins to manifest. Chapter 2. God has already given the eternal principle behind true prayer. If you want to understand why so many prayers seem to go unanswered, you must begin by grasping a truth as simple as it is powerful. God has already given everything that the human soul can legitimately desire. Peace, health, provision, freedom, love, purpose, expansion, all have already been created in the divine mind long before the request was ever made. The purpose of prayer is not to make God do something. Rather, the purpose of prayer is to align individual consciousness with what already is, with what has been eternally given in the spiritual plane. Nothing can be added to God. Nothing can be demanded of Him, because the totality of good is already complete, available, and operating as perfect law. When one prays believing that God has not yet given, one prays from a false premise, and that premise creates confusion and frustration. If you think you must convince God to help you, beg for His attention, or fulfill certain requirements to deserve an answer, then your prayer is blocked from the start, because you are beginning with the idea of separation. You on one side, God on the other. But Spirit is not separate from you. It is not in a distant realm waiting for conditions to be met. Spirit is the very substance of your life, and if you are made in the image and likeness of God, then your good is as close to you as your own breath. God is not about to give you something. He has already given it. Jesus, in His infinite wisdom, did not teach people to beg like mendicants. He taught them to declare as children of God. He said, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." But He did not say that it would come as a result of the mere asking. He said it would come as a result of the certainty that it had already been received. Because faith is not an empty emotion. It is a certainty based on the unchanging nature of God, and that nature is absolute love, perfect intelligence, and infinite provision. If you knew in the depths of your being that everything you need has already been given, your prayer would be very different. You would no longer cry out, you would no longer beg, you would no longer repeat formulas hoping for magical answers. Instead, you would simply be still, close the eyes of the body, open the eyes of the soul, and silently affirm, "Father, thank you because you have already given. I open my mind and my heart to receive what is already mine by divine right." This inner shift transforms everything, because prayer does not work by the effort with which it is spoken, but by the level of consciousness from which it is issued. And when the soul prays knowing that good has already been given, it enters a vibration of acceptance. And accepting is the act that allows the invisible to become visible. Imagine a mighty river flowing with strength and abundance. That river is the life of God, ceaselessly flowing toward you. Do you need to ask the river to flow? No, you only need to remove the stones in your mind that block its passage. The stones of doubt, fear, belief in lack, guilt, or unworthiness. When these stones are removed through a clear consciousness, the river flows unhindered. And that is true prayer, removing blockages and allowing good to flow. Scientific prayer is based on this understanding. The good you seek is already present in its spiritual form. Health already exists as a perfect idea. Provision already exists as a principle of abundance. Peace already exists as a quality of spirit. When you pray, you are not creating these things. You are aligning yourself with them, allowing them to descend from the invisible to the visible through your receptive consciousness. That is why every effective prayer begins with gratitude, because only one who knows they have already received can give thanks with sincerity. And that gratitude is not a mere formality, it is the vibrational language of faith. When you give thanks before seeing, you are declaring that manifestation is certain, because the cause has already been set in motion. And that certainty speeds up the process, opens the channels, dissolves resistance. So do not say, God, give me, say, thank you, God, because it is already done. Do not say, please help me, say, you are my constant help and your good flows to me now. Do not say, I am waiting for a sign, say, divine wisdom guides my steps and I listen with clarity. This language is not self-deception, it is the activation of divine law. It is the expression of a mind that has remembered the truth. God does not need to be persuaded. God only needs to be recognized. And when he is recognized as source, life, and totality, prayer ceases to be a struggle and becomes communion. It ceases to be waiting and becomes realization. It ceases to be uncertain hope and becomes radiant certainty. Because the soul knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that God has already given. And that is enough, and that works, and that is true prayer. Chapter 3, How Prayer Works, Mental Law, Vibration, and Spiritual Cause. Understanding how prayer works is as essential as understanding how a seed grows in the earth. No one would plant a seed and watch it with suspicion, doubting at every moment whether it will bear fruit or not. One knows, through experience and trust in natural law, that if the seed is good, the soil is fertile and there is water and sunlight. Growth is inevitable. Prayer operates in the same way. It is not a mystical or random act, but a conscious planting in the invisible soil of the mind. And that soil, if properly prepared, responds with mathematical precision. Prayer works by law. That is why it is called scientific prayer, because it activates exact principles that operate constantly, regardless of personal circumstances. Just as fire burns regardless of who touches it, effective prayer produces results when properly activated, no matter who utters it. God does not respond to names, genders, creeds, or rituals. He responds to vibration. Every thought you hold, every word you affirm, every emotion you fuel with intensity emits a vibration. That vibration becomes a cause, and every cause produces an effect. It is not punishment. It is not a reward. It is the law. The mind is the instrument through which this vibration is generated. Therefore, the mind must be directed, purified, and trained to pray correctly. Prayer is not about repeating words with the lips, while doubt, fear, or contradiction dwell deep inside. Prayer must be a unified act of clear thought, deep feeling, and precise word. When these three elements align, the vibration emitted is pure, strong, and irresistible. Prayer is, in its essence, the creation of a vibrational mental image that must manifest in the visible world. There is no true prayer without an image. That is why when you affirm something, you must see it internally as already done. You must feel it as already yours. You must think as someone who already has it. And thus the spiritual cause is established. Once the cause is set, the result is a matter of time, not possibility. No matter what external conditions may seem to say, those conditions are simply the accumulated effect of past thoughts. What you see in your life today is not the result of what you think now, but of what you previously thought, believed, and felt. Therefore, if you want to change what you see, you must change what you plant now. And that planting is done through prayer. A prayer that does not seek to change the world, but to create a new cause that transforms it from its root. The mental law of creation. The mental law states that a thought sustained with emotional intensity has creative power. That is why many prayers do not work. They are formulated from anxiety, fear, or desperation, and the dominant vibration of those emotions cancels out the effect of the words. It is not enough to say, I am at peace, if your heart is racing with anguish. It is not enough to say, I trust, if your mind is in conflict with itself. Vibration must match verbal content, and law responds to vibration, not words. That is why the conscious practitioner first works on ordering their inner state. The mind centers its attention, the truth is declared with sincerity, and the feeling affirms it as real. Only then does prayer begin to work. Spiritual cause, the highest level of thought. The spiritual cause is the highest level of thought. It is when the mind not only imagines or desires, but recognizes what is real beyond what appears to be. At this level, prayer transcends petition, and enters into recognition. You no longer say, "Please let it come." You say, "Thank you," because it already is. And this declaration is not theater nor illusion. It is an affirmation supported by law, sustained by the right vibration, and guided by the soul that knows who it is and what is real. Just as an architect cannot build a house without blueprints, the one who prays cannot create a reality without a clear image. Scientific prayer is the mental blueprint. Emotional vibration is the energetic permission. Spiritual law is the force that organizes the elements of the universe to bring the vision into form. This process is happening constantly. The only difference is that most people pray unconsciously without knowing that they are praying. They think negatively. They feel fear. They speak with complaint. And then they wonder why life does not change. But the awakened practitioner knows what they are doing. Every word is a seed. Every image is a command. Every emotion is a key. And with this awareness, they build their reality from the soul. Prayer is not an exception. It is the highest form of creation. Prayer is not something you do occasionally. It is a way of living, and whoever lives by prayer lives in the cause, not in the effect. Lives as a channel of good, not as a victim of circumstances. Lives in certainty, not in waiting. Lives knowing that law is at work, and that every true prayer spoken from the soul has already been answered in spirit. All that remains is to allow it to be expressed in form. Chapter 4. To pray is to affirm thought as the seed of all manifestation. Most people still believe that praying is speaking to God, as one would converse with a strict judge or a distracted benefactor. They approach with fear or desperation, pouring out a series of words in search of comfort, a solution or a miracle. But when we understand the true nature of prayer, we discover that praying is not about repeating supplications. It is about affirming. To affirm does not mean to invent or force something. To affirm is to clearly and convincingly recognize a spiritual truth, even if it has not yet manifested in the external world. And this affirmation, when sustained with faith, feeling, and understanding, becomes the inevitable seed of manifestation. Everything begins with thought. Thought is the primordial substance from which experience is shaped, and affirmative thought, focused and sustained in truth rather than in appearances, is the most powerful prayer that can be spoken. That is why to pray is to affirm spiritual reality above material appearance, to declare the invisible as already present, to plant in the mind the image of perfection so that the universe begins to organize itself around it. Jesus never taught a prayer based on the denial of spiritual reality. He never said, "Lord, have mercy on this miserable soul." He said, "Rise and walk." He said, "Be clean." He said, "Your faith has saved you." Every one of his words was an affirmation of life, health, and power, not because he ignored external conditions, but because he knew that truth had authority over appearance. And that is what we must imitate. It is not about fighting against what we see. It is about holding in our minds what is truly real until it expresses itself in the visible world. Affirmation as a creative seed. Every affirmative thought is a seed cast into the creative field of the universe. And just as no one plants a rose expecting thorns, no one can sow thoughts of abundance and reap lack. Thoughts of health and receive illness. Thoughts of harmony and harvest chaos. The universe does not respond to loose words. It responds to coherent vibrations. And that vibration originates from what you habitually affirm in your mind, what you sustain with your attention, and what you cultivate with your emotions. That is why prayer is not just a moment. It is a way of thinking. It is not about saying, "I am prosperous" once a day, and then spending the rest of the time thinking about lack. It is not about declaring, "I am healthy" while discussing symptoms and fear with others. It is not about affirming, "I am at peace," and then getting entangled in judgments, conflicts, and worries. Affirmation must be upheld with inner fidelity. It is not the volume of words that determines their power, but the clarity of the thought behind them. To pray is to affirm God's truth about you, and that truth is that you are a child of the Most High, a living image of love, an extension of the divine mind, a temple of the Holy Spirit. That truth is that you are already whole, already provided for, already healthy in essence, already free. And when you affirm that truth, you are not inventing something. You are remembering what has always been. You are declaring the invisible as more real than the visible. And that declaration, when repeated with devotion and understanding, has the power to reorder all external circumstances. Affirming is convincing the consciousness. One does not affirm to convince God, but to convince one's own consciousness. One does not affirm for something to happen out there, but for something to awaken within. Spiritual affirmation is the act of planting, nurturing, and harvesting God's eternal goodness in the soil of the mind. And that soil must be free of contradiction. You cannot affirm one thing and fear its opposite. You cannot declare the truth and then run to consult the lie. Your faith must become stable, calm, and confident, like the sower who knows the harvest will come. This is the true power of affirmative prayer. It does not lie in repetition, but in constancy. It does not lie in urgency, but in serenity. It does not lie in the number of words, but in the purity of the consciousness that speaks them. And that consciousness is built day by day, thought by thought, choice by choice. When you learn to think as God thinks, to speak as God would speak, to see your life as God sees it, prayer becomes a permanent state of the soul. You no longer need to kneel to feel heard. You no longer need to wait for a sign to know you are guided. You yourself become the answer. Because when you pray by affirming the truth, when you plant pure thoughts and water them with faith, when you hold the image of the divine in your heart, God works through you. And then your word is no longer just human speech. It is a living seed. It is an active cause. It is the power of creation in motion. This is how prayer works. And this is how true transformation begins. Not by asking, but by affirming. Not by waiting, but by being. Because when you pray from truth, you are already planting the glory of God in the garden of your world. Chapter 5. The power of the word, because everything you declare comes to pass. In the beginning was the word. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is an exact statement of how the universe operates. The word, the spoken expression, is the creative principle in action. And when this word is understood spiritually, it is not merely a sound. It is a vibratory declaration, charged with intention and direction. Every word you speak is a command to the universe. Every affirmation you uphold with conviction shapes the invisible mold of your experience. And that is why everything you declare comes to pass. Not because words have power in themselves, but because the consciousness behind them is the force that activates the law. God creates through the word, not with hands, not with tools, but with the power of thought spoken with pure intention. Let there be light, and there was light. That is the nature of spirit, to declare the invisible and make it visible. And if you are made in the image and likeness of God, then your word also creates. Not at the arbitrary level of fantasy, but at the exact level of your inner vibration. What you deeply think, what you intensely feel, and what you speak from that depth and intensity becomes form. The word shapes reality. Scripture states it in many ways. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. It is not what enters the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of it. These are not mystical warnings. They are clear descriptions of how words shape reality. When you pray, you're not just sending sounds into the air. You are declaring causes. You are forming mental molds that by law will attract their equivalent circumstances. If you declare with fear, you are planting fear. If you declare with doubt, you are sustaining contradiction. If you declare with spiritual firmness, you are affirming God's presence in what you see. And that presence transforms everything. Silent words and internal decrees. The word is not only audible, it is also expressed in repetitive thoughts, in silent judgments, in the internal decrees you issue without realizing it. When you say, "This always goes wrong for me," you are praying. When you say, "There is never enough," you are praying. When you repeat, "I can't take this anymore," you are praying. And that prayer, when sustained with emotional force, manifests, not because God wills it so, but because the law responds to the vibration you generate. But when you begin to choose your words consciously, when you stop speaking from habit and start declaring from the soul, everything changes. An affirmation like "God in me is perfect health now" is not just a beautiful phrase. It is a vibratory key that aligns your consciousness with the energy of wholeness. When you say, "I am at peace because divine mind guides my steps," you are not escaping reality. You are creating a new reality. Words direct energy. Words have direction. They move toward what they name and infuse it with your energy. If you bless a situation, you elevate it. If you curse someone, you bind yourself to their lowest vibration. If you express gratitude, you open doors. If you complain, you close them. You decide. The universe is alive, sensitive, receptive, a moldable field of energy that responds to your word like an obedient echo. What you speak with emotion returns to you multiplied. That is why scientific prayer is a sacred exercise of verbal selection. Not out of superstition, but by law. Speak only what you wish to see manifested. Declare only what affirms spiritual truth. Decree only that which aligns with universal good. And if you cannot yet do so with certainty, remain silent, because silence, when conscious, is also prayer in potential. The word is a tool of divine creation. Jesus did not speak carelessly. Every word of his was a seed, every phrase a spiritual action. When he said, "Lazarus, come forth," he was not making an attempt. He was issuing a command with spiritual authority. And that authority did not come from his humanity, but from his unity with the source. That same unity dwells within you. And when you pray from that place, your word also resurrects what was dormant, restores what was lost, reorders what was in disarray. To pray is to speak as God speaks. It is to use the word not to describe appearances, but to declare the truth. It is to say, "I am," instead of "I want." It is to affirm "it is" instead of "maybe." It is to hold "thank you" instead of "please." Because in the kingdom of truth, everything is already given. All that remains is for someone to declare it with faith, affirm it with love, sustain it with trust. The sacred function of your word. Your word is not just any tool. It is the brush with which you paint your world. Use it as Spirit would, with beauty, with purpose, with power. And you will see that what seems impossible today will become living testimony of your prayer made flesh. Because everything you declare, if spoken from truth, comes to pass. Chapter 6. Feeling and vibration, the invisible energy that activates the law. The universe does not respond only to what you think or say. It responds to what you feel intensely and sustain with conviction. The mental law is precise, but it is feeling that gives it life. Without feeling, prayer is like a seed without water. You can repeat the most elevated affirmations, but if deep within you there is fear, doubt, or contradiction, the vibration you emit does not match the words you speak, and it is vibration that determines the outcome. Feeling, the energy that activates creation. Everything in creation vibrates. Everything is energy in motion, and that energy has a tone, a frequency, a charge. Thought is form, but feeling is energy. And when both things unify in the same direction, what is called effective prayer occurs, a clear affirmation sustained by a coherent emotional vibration. Jesus did not pray only with ideas. He prayed from the heart. Every time he spoke words of healing or multiplication, he did so from an absolute consciousness of unity with God. And that consciousness was impregnated with certainty, with peace, with active love. There was no contradiction in him. His word was pure. His intention was elevated. His feeling was firm. That is why what he declared came to pass. Feeling precedes manifestation. For prayer to work as a living law, it must be felt as true, and this is not achieved by forcing emotion, but by quieting mental noise, so that the soul can feel what it already knows. When you affirm, "God is my perfect provision now," you must feel the tranquility of someone who has already received. When you declare, "I am in divine health," you must feel the relief, the gratitude, and the peace that accompanies that reality. Feeling must precede manifestation, not the other way around, because it is a feeling that activates the invisible field of the law. This is why many people pray without visible results. They say, "I trust," but inside they feel tense. They say, "I know it's possible," but they vibrate in frustration. They say, "Thank you," but they do so with the anxious expectation that something must change. The law does not respond to verbal content. It responds to internal vibration. And that vibration cannot be faked. It must be born from a transformed consciousness. Cultivating the right feeling. So how do you cultivate the right feeling? First, by quieting the mind. Effective prayer does not arise from hurry or chaos. Pause, breathe. Remember the truth. Remember that God has already given, that good is already available, that everything is operating under perfect order, even if your senses do not yet perceive it. And from that recognition, allow the feeling to arise. Do not fabricate it. Recognize it. Love, peace, security, joy. All of it is already within you, waiting to be remembered. A prayer spoken without emotion, an affirmation without energetic charge, is like a decree written in the wind. But a simple word, spoken with deep faith and true feeling, has the power to move mountains, because the universe is sensitive to the heart, and a heart that vibrates in harmony with truth emits a frequency that transforms matter. More than words, the power of alignment. Do not worry so much about finding the exact phrase. Worry about finding the right vibration. Do not repeat words expecting them to do the work. Do the inner work of elevating your emotional state, and then let the words reflect it. Be silent, feel the peace, declare from there. And that vibration will become cause, and that cause will become form. There is no prayer without vibration, and there is no vibration more powerful than love. Love your prayer, love the truth you affirm, love the possibility of living in fullness, and that vibration will open channels, remove obstacles, correct paths. Not because you force reality, but because you align it with the eternal. Believing is feeling as true. When Jesus said, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours," he was speaking about feelings. To believe is to feel as true. To believe is to vibrate in the reality you desire, before seeing it. And that vibration summons the right forms. You are a constant transmitter. Your thought is form, your feeling is energy, your prayer is creation. And when these three things align, thought, word, emotion, the law responds, the universe obeys, and the spirit manifests. Chapter 7. Visualizing in Spirit. Seeing with the eyes of the soul to create the invisible. Before something manifests in the visible plane, it must first be seen with the eyes of the soul. Nothing exists in the external world that was not first conceived as an image in consciousness. This is one of the great spiritual truths that Master Jesus understood and used naturally. Vision precedes manifestation. The mistake many make is to pray without seeing, to declare without imagining, to affirm without internally holding the image of what they wish to manifest. But prayer without vision is like lighting a lamp without oil. The light will not appear. What it means to visualize in spirit. Visualizing is not daydreaming or fantasizing without direction. To visualize in spirit is to elevate the mind above appearances and to contemplate through faith the perfection already realized in the spiritual plane. It is to see as God sees, without limitation, without doubt, without fragmentation. It is to look with the inner eyes, the eyes of understanding, and to firmly hold the living image of the good. That already is, even if it has not yet expressed itself in form. The soul that knows how to see in spirit begins to live in the kingdom before the kingdom becomes visible. Jesus said, "The eyes are the lamp of the body," and that lamp is not physical sight, but inner vision. When that vision is clear, the body and all your experience are filled with light. But if it is darkened by fear, by doubt, or by images of the past, manifestation is delayed, distorted, or blocked. Prayer must be accompanied by vision. It is not enough to say, "I am prosperous." You must see yourself walking in abundance, feeling the freedom of one who lacks nothing. It is not enough to say, "I am healthy." You must visualize yourself strong, vibrant, in perfect harmony. It is not enough to say, "I am at peace." You must see that peace, enveloping every aspect of your life, like a soft breeze that nothing can disturb. The mind works with images. The subconscious responds to images. The mental law is activated through images. That is why every true prayer must contain a clear, vivid image, held with love and certainty. And that image, if nurtured with persistence, begins to attract, to reorganize, to transform external conditions, naturally, effortlessly. The image is the mold, the vibration is the magnet. The word is the activation, and the faith is the flame that ignites it all. The difference between carnal and spiritual visualization. But there is a great difference between visualizing with the carnal mind and visualizing in spirit. The carnal mind imagines from desire and lack. It sees from urgency. It hopes the image will fill the emptiness. Spiritual visualization, however, does not come from emptiness, but from fullness. It does not seek to complete what is missing, but to express what already is. It is an act of recognition, not escape. It is a contemplation of the eternal, not a fabrication of the mind. And that is why it has power, because it sees from truth. To visualize in spirit is to pray with the eyes closed to the world and open to the soul. It is to see the loved one already healed. It is to see the home already in peace. It is to see the account full, the body in balance, the project fulfilled, the heart expanded. Not as a desire, but as a spiritual reality about to descend. And the longer that image is held, without anxiety, without attachment, without doubt, the more quickly it takes form, because everything that is held in spirit must take shape. That is the law, that is the promise, that is the function of the awakened soul. Seeing in spirit is an act of creation. You do not need to see every detail, you only need to see the essence. Feel the sensation of fulfillment. Inhabit the image as one who already lives it. It is not enough to construct it. As a picture in the mind, you must enter it. You must move in its atmosphere. You must breathe within that vision and then let it go, not because you forget it, but because you have surrendered it to Spirit, to complete it. Because your task is to see, the task of the law is to manifest. Train your inner eyes. Quiet the mind and let the soul show you what is real. Remain in that vision for a few minutes each day, without tension, without urgency, without forced expectation. Do it as an act of love, as a form of worship, as an exercise in unity with eternal good, and then prayer will cease to be a plea and will become a silent manifestation. The invisible precedes the visible. Always remember, the visible world is a shadow of the invisible world, and whoever learns to see with the eyes of the soul also learns to create effortlessly, because what is seen in spirit will soon be seen in form. Chapter 8: How to Eliminate Doubt, Intelligent Faith. Nothing hinders the power of prayer more than doubt. It may seem harmless, even logical, to the eyes of the world, but in the spiritual realm, doubt is a slow, persistent poison that corrodes the root of all manifestations. It doesn't matter how fervently you pray if there is hesitation deep within. If you alternate between certainty and fear, between yes and but, between trust and suspicion, then the law is suspended, not because it punishes, but because it cannot operate in a divided field. What activates true prayer is faith, not a leap into darkness, nor a desperate attempt to believe beyond logic. Spiritual faith is intelligent, lucid, serene. It is the certainty that springs not from ignoring reason, but from placing it in its proper place, under the authority of a higher understanding. Jesus never asked for blind faith. He said, "According to your faith, let it be done unto you." He did not say, "according to your emotion or your effort." But faith, and that faith is inner vision. It is knowing the law and trusting in its operation. It is knowing that if something is affirmed clearly, sustained with feeling, and visualized with certainty, then it must manifest, not because of luck, but because an exact cause has been planted. How to eliminate doubt. First, by understanding it. Doubt arises when the soul is not yet convinced of its unity with God. It arises when the mind believes there is a distance between what is and what could be. It arises when appearance is confused with reality. That is why doubt dissolves with spiritual understanding. Do not fight against it. Do not hide it. Do not pretend it does not exist. Observe it, illuminate it, and bring it before the truth. The truth is that God has already given. The truth is that the law responds with precision. The truth is that the good already exists in its spiritual form. The truth is that the Spirit within you has authority over all appearances. When the soul meditates on these truths, there is no need to force faith. Faith springs forth like natural light. Doubt also fades with practice. Every time you affirm a spiritual truth and see its effect, no matter how small, your faith grows stronger. It is like a muscle that responds to conscious use. Trust first in simple things. A perfect appointment, a harmonious conversation, an unexpected solution. Affirm, visualize, feel, and observe every time the law is fulfilled, and it will be fulfilled. You will have a new foundation on which to build greater certainty, and that certainty will be solid, not emotional, clear, not fanatical, deep, not fragile. Doubt is also eliminated when you understand. That time does not contradict the law. Many doubt because they do not see immediate results, but the spiritual law is not bound by the clock. It operates in perfect time, the time when consciousness is ready to receive. If you do not see results right now, do not say it doesn't work. Say, the law is working now in silence in the invisible, and my good is coming to me at the perfect moment. And that affirmation will dissipate the shadow of doubt. You do not need to have faith in yourself as a limited person. You need to have faith in the presence working through you. You do not need to trust in your human strength or in your ability to convince the universe. You only need to know that you are aligned with the truth and that the truth has the power to fulfill itself. Your task is not to make something happen. Your task is to keep your consciousness in harmony with the law, and the law will do the rest. If doubt still arises, do not condemn yourself. Remember that even the closest disciples of Jesus doubted, and yet the Master did not reject them. He corrected them, elevated them, loved them. Do the same with yourself. When doubt arises, do not feed it. Do not repress it with fear, but do not sink it as if it were truth. Look at it with compassion and say, I do not need you. I know in whom I have believed. I know the law responds. I know the good is already given, and I remain in that certainty, though my senses tell me otherwise. Faith is the total absence of doubt. It is standing firm even when doubt whispers. And that firmness, repeated day after day, silences every false voice and opens the channel for the invisible to manifest. Remember, doubt is fog. Faith is the sun, and no fog can resist the light forever. Hold your vision, affirm the truth, feel the good already realized, and doubt without nourishment will dissolve like a shadow at dawn. Chapter 9. The Silent Prayer. When the soul speaks without words, there is a point on the spiritual path where words become unnecessary, not because they lose their value, but because the soul has learned to communicate directly with God from a deeper, purer, and more intimate place. That place is silence, and this form of communion is called silent prayer. Silent prayer is not the absence of prayer. It is prayer in its highest form. It is the vibration of a consciousness that no longer needs to say anything, because it knows it is already united with the Source. It is the state of inner stillness where nothing is asked, affirmed, or explained. One simply is. One is in the presence, breathing in truth, remaining in the light, not seeking anything other than to be in it. In this state, the mind quiets, and the heart speaks without sound. There are no phrases, no formulas, only a sense of humility so absolute, so real, so alive, that everything else fades away. And from that place all things can occur. Jesus practiced this. He withdrew to the mountain, to the desert, to the garden, and there, in solitude, without speeches or witnesses, he entered that space of pure communion. Not because he needed God to speak to him, but because he knew how to listen in the silence. And in that listening, guidance arrived, strength was renewed, and the soul was uplifted. There is no greater prayer than silence inhabited by faith. Silent prayer does not require a specific posture or sacred place. It can occur in the midst of the bustling city or in the quiet solitude of the night. It can happen with a deep breath, a moment of surrender, or a sigh that seeks no words. It is not about ceasing to think, but about ceasing to resist. It is allowing the mind to rest in God, like a river finally finding the sea and dissolving into it. There is no urgency, no anxiety, no expectation, only presence, only peace, only light. And in that silence, prayer happens without you noticing, because the truth is already being affirmed without the need for a voice, because love is already being expressed without the need for form, because the soul is speaking, and God always listens to the soul that does not disguise itself. Silent prayer is also the moment when one can most easily listen. While the mind speaks, it cannot hear. And often, what is needed is not more affirmation, but more listening, more contemplation, more surrender, more openness. When the soul remains silent, the spirit has space to speak, not with words, but with soft impressions, clear intuitions, deep sensations of certainty that do not come from thought. And in that wordless language the answers come, not as logic but as sudden understanding, not as mental solutions but as inner direction. Practicing silent prayer is an art that is cultivated, not mastered from the beginning, because the mind tends toward noise, explanation, and the need to control. But the more one enters it, the more easily its power is recognized. A few minutes a day are enough, a space of surrender, stillness, and presence, a deep breath, a clear intention. I am here, God. I do not need to say anything. I just want to be with you. And with that, the soul begins to speak and the spirit begins to work. It is not always necessary to affirm to create. There are times when the mere consciousness of good is enough. There are times when the simple act of resting in God produces more fruit than 1,000 declarations, because in true silence faith becomes tangible. And that faith, even if it says nothing, moves mountains. Silent prayer is also healing. It heals the restless mind, the wounded heart, the tired body, because in it all returns to the origin, and the origin is God. And in God, there is no conflict, no scarcity, no fear. When you do not know what to say, pray in silence. When the mind is tired of thinking, pray in silence. When emotion is stirred and you cannot affirm clearly, pray in silence. Because that silence is not emptiness. It is plenitude, the space where the soul and God merge, and from where all is renewed. This is how the soul speaks without words. This is how prayer transcends form. This is how the invisible begins to organize itself and peace descends without a single sound, but with all the power of love in action. Chapter 10, Prayer and Forgiveness, the inner unblocking of divine energy. No prayer can flow fully if it is obstructed by the rigidity of resentment. Divine energy, like a river of light, seeks to enter and express itself through the human soul, but if the channel is blocked by grudges, unresolved wounds, or sustained judgments, the prayer loses its creative power, not because God withdraws, but because consciousness has closed itself. Forgiveness is not a decorative option on the spiritual path. It is a fundamental necessity. It is the act by which the soul releases the past, unties the knots of pain, and opens space for grace to flow uninterrupted. As long as the mind holds thoughts of revenge, injustice, or guilt, whether toward others or oneself, it is at war with itself, and a divided mind cannot pray with clarity. Jesus, the absolute master of divine consciousness, clearly stated, "If you bring your offering to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering and go first to be reconciled." Why? Because true prayer cannot be offered from a closed consciousness. The altar represents the act of prayer. The offering is your affirmative word. But if your inner being holds resentment, your affirmation lacks spiritual root. It cannot produce fruit because the field is poisoned. That is why forgiveness is the deep cleansing that clears the channel through which divine power flows. To forgive is not to justify. It is not saying that what happened was right, nor is it to erase the pain or annul the memory. Forgiveness is to let go. It is to choose, with spiritual authority, not to remain bound to the past. It is to look at the wound from a higher consciousness and declare, "This no longer has power over me." It is to return to God the judgment that the ego insists on holding on to. When this act is done sincerely, the soul is freed and prayer becomes light. One must also forgive oneself. Many prayers do not prosper because the person still feels unworthy of receiving. They believe they have failed too much, that they haven't done enough, or that they don't deserve abundance, and that self-accusation is one of the deepest blockages. God does not keep records. Love does not keep score. Life does not punish. It teaches, guides, and transforms. Therefore, the soul that recognizes its mistake and turns toward the light has already been forgiven. What remains is to accept that forgiveness, to incorporate it, and to let the guilt dissolve in the awareness of absolute love. Forgiveness is an act of vibrational healing. When you forgive, your energy field changes, your frequency rises, the heart opens, the mind calms, and then prayer begins to work without interference. What once seemed stagnant flows. What once resisted adjusts because the spirit never stops. It is the soul that must remove the barriers. You don't need to feel tenderness toward the one who harmed you, nor do you need to reconcile externally if it is not the right thing to do. You only need to release the internal tie, and this is done with a simple but powerful declaration. I forgive you, I free myself, I leave you in the hands of God. If you still can't say it with your heart, start with your lips. Repeat, pray, breathe in that direction. The sincere disposition summons the power that will do the rest. There are prayers that do not prosper until forgiveness is given, not because God rejects them, but because the soul cannot receive what it is not ready to hold, and forgiveness is the highest preparation for blessing. It is the soul's fertilizer, the purification of the inner temple, the act that restores coherence between what is asked, what is believed, and what is felt. Forgive not for the other, but for yourself, to clear the channel, to let the light in, for love to heal, and for prayer to finally become pure creative energy and not a repetition from pain. Remember, God has not withdrawn. The law is still operating. Goodness is available. You just need to remove the veils. And among all the veils, the one of resentment is the densest. But once it is released, once the soul says, I am free, all is forgiven, all returns to divine order, then prayer becomes a mighty river, a living force, a word that creates, a presence that transforms. Chapter 11, Pray Without Ceasing, How to Turn Your Entire Life into a Continuous Prayer. The Apostle Paul wrote, Pray without ceasing. For many, this phrase has seemed like an unreachable ideal, a mystical exhortation reserved for saints or those living in spiritual retreat. But when one understands the true nature of prayer, this instruction reveals itself not as a pious exaggeration, but as a concrete possibility and a deep need of the soul. Praying without ceasing does not mean repeating words all day, nor living on your knees, nor being absent from the world. It means living in a state of constant communion with God in everything you do, think, say, and feel. It means making each moment an extension of prayer. True prayer is not an isolated activity. It is not an act limited to certain moments of the day. It is not an occasional visit to the spiritual plane. It is, in its highest form, a permanent state of consciousness. It is an inner attitude of humility, surrender, trust, and constant recognition of the good as an active presence. When the soul reaches this state, it does not need to enter into prayer. It lives in prayer. To pray without ceasing is to begin the morning with deep gratitude and allow that gratitude to bathe each subsequent thought. It is walking down the street and seeing each person as a soul, not as an obstacle. It is doing everyday work as an offering to the Spirit, without complaint, without hurry, without automatism. It is transforming repetitive thought into sacred affirmations. It is replacing complaint with blessing, criticism with compassion, fear with the remembrance of truth. Thus, the soul turns the mundane into the sacred, and that is continuous prayer. Jesus lived in this state. He didn't need to light candles or seek ceremonies. He himself was the temple. Everything he did from the center of his divine consciousness. He healed while walking, taught while eating, and prayed while looking with love. Every word he spoke was prayer, every silence too, every decision an expression of the kingdom. Praying without ceasing is living in the presence, knowing that God is in every moment, not as a spectator, but as the living source flowing through you. When you cook, you pray. When you clean, you pray. When you work, you pray. When you rest, you pray. Because it is not about what you do, but from where you do it, whether from the ego or from the spirit, from anxiety or from certainty, from fear or from trust. To achieve this state, it is not necessary to withdraw from the world, but to transform your perspective. See in everything an opportunity to express God. See in each encounter an occasion to love. See in each challenge an invitation to grow in understanding. See in each emotion a path of purification. Thus, each step becomes part of the prayer, and the soul begins to vibrate constantly in the silent language of the Spirit. Thought becomes creative when it aligns with the law. Words become healing when charged with truth. The simplest gestures become sacred when done with love. And then life is no longer divided between the spiritual and the mundane. Everything is spiritual. Everything is an expression of living prayer. Everything becomes an act of communion. This does not mean you should not continue reserving moments for conscious prayer. Moments of silence, affirmation, and visualization remain essential. But what changes is that they are no longer isolated moments of God. Your whole life becomes a moment of God, and that continuity protects you, guides you, and elevates you. Praying without ceasing is living from the soul, not from habit. It is looking at everything through the prism of love. It is thinking from the divine principle. It is a feeling of peace. It is acting from light. It is not about repeating formulas. It is about being prayer, becoming an open channel, a finely tuned instrument, a constant expression of the Spirit. And when this happens, prayer ceases to be a search and becomes a presence. It ceases to be waiting and becomes a realization. It ceases to be a request and becomes creation. Whoever prays without ceasing lives in the kingdom, even though they are in the world. Nothing deeply disturbs them because they have found balance. Nothing dominates them because they live from the Spirit. Nothing separates them because they have become one with the source. And from there, each day is a miracle, every encounter a lesson, every word a seed, every breath a silent affirmation that God lives here, now, in me. Chapter 12. How to Pray for Others, Healing, Blessing, and True Intercession. Prayer has the power to transform lives, not only our own but also the lives of those touched by our enlightened thoughts. Praying for others is not an act of condescension or spiritual control. It is a sacred service, a loving extension of awakened consciousness toward another soul, recognizing in them the same truth that sustains the entire universe. When praying for another correctly, we do not invade their free will, we do not project personal desires, and we do not attempt to fix what the ego considers broken. We silently hold the perfect image of that soul as God sees it, whole, healthy, harmonious, and on its path toward divine realization. Jesus did not ask whether someone deserved to be healed. He did not demand penance or conditions. He simply looked with the eyes of the Spirit, and upon seeing the truth in the other, he awakened it. He did not impose or force. He recognized, affirmed, and liberated. This is the path of true intercession, to see for the other what they cannot yet see for themselves, and by holding that vision in mind and heart, create a vibratory space where healing and transformation can take place. When you pray for someone, do not describe their problem. Do not say, "Oh my God, they are sick, help them." Do not mentally repeat the lack, the anguish, or the conflict they are going through, because by doing so, you are feeding the appearance with your energy. True prayer does not focus on the symptom, but on the spiritual cause, and the spiritual cause is always the same, the awareness of unity with God. Therefore, prayer for another should affirm that unity. It should see beyond the form and hold the invisible perfection waiting to be recognized. Silently or quietly say, "You are a perfect expression of spirit. You are whole now. God's love surrounds you. Divine wisdom guides you. The perfect life of God flows through you and in you." And as you affirm this, do not think of the appearance. Feel the truth. Visualize that person radiant, at peace, and in balance. Do not imagine their struggle, imagine their awakening. This is not mental manipulation. It is not psychological manipulation. It is spiritual communion. Your prayer does not change the person directly. It changes your vision of them. And that new vision generates a vibration that can touch their consciousness if they are open to receiving it. The law does not compel, grace does not force, but the elevated vibration is a powerful invitation to the soul. You will not always see immediate results, and sometimes the person may seem resistant, but your task is not to measure the effects, it is to hold the light. The mind that does not control, the mind that now blesses, and that blessing, even if not visible instantly, is never lost. It works in silence, it works in the invisible, it works beyond time. It is also important to pray without attachment to the result. Do not pray saying, "Make them accept this job," or "Make them come back," or "Make them change." That is not prayer. It is disguised manipulation. Pray saying, "God's will is done in you in the best way at the perfect time, and I align myself with that will, knowing that only good can come from it." This detachment is not indifference. It is respect for the other soul. It is trust that the Spirit works with wisdom beyond what the ego desires. When you pray for another, you also heal yourself, because in the act of holding the spiritual vision for someone else, you strengthen your own connection to the truth. You become a channel, an instrument, a point of light, and that light also cleanses you, elevates you, and orders you. Make praying for others a regular act, not only in moments of crisis, but as a daily practice of love. Mentally bless those around you. Send thoughts of peace to those who are in pain. Declare well-being for those who have hurt you, not as submission, but as mutual liberation. Every time you bless, you break invisible chains. Every time you affirm the truth for another, you open doors they may not see. And every time you pray like this, the world becomes a little clearer, and you become a little more Christ-like. Because praying for another is not speaking about them before God, it is seeing them as God already sees them. And that vision, held in silence, is the greatest form of love that can be given in this world. Chapter 13, Concrete Results: Why Prayer Changes the Visible World. One of the most persistent errors about prayer is believing that it belongs solely to the inner realm, that it is useful only to produce mental peace or emotional comfort. It is thought that prayer is something beautiful, yes, but with no real impact on matter, facts, or circumstances. Nothing could be further from the truth. Prayer, when understood and practiced correctly, has the power to change the visible world with precision and effectiveness, not because it is magical, but because it operates at the level where everything begins, in the spiritual cause of reality. The external world, with its situations, relationships, conditions, and scenarios, is always an effect. And like every effect, it is supported by a prior cause. That cause is not random or driven by external capricious forces. It is in the mind. Everything you see is the visible expression of an invisible pattern, and that pattern is formed through thought, feeling, word, and internal vision. Prayer is directly intervening in that cause, and by doing so, modifying its effect. When you pray correctly, you are not pushing matter with effort. You are changing the spiritual mold from which the form is generated. You are raising the vibration of your consciousness, and that higher vibration begins to rearrange and transform the elements that make up your experience. There is no external situation that can indefinitely resist a deep change in the consciousness that sustains it. Just as ice melts in the heat, limitation dissolves in the presence of truth affirmed with faith. Jesus did not teach a symbolic prayer, he taught an operative prayer. When he multiplied the loaves, he did not do it to inspire the crowd, but to show that matter obeys divine consciousness. When he calmed the storm, it was not a poetic gesture, but a concrete manifestation of spiritual dominion over physical conditions. And when he said, "All things you ask in prayer, believing you will receive," he was revealing a universal law, not a miraculous exception. Prayer changes the visible world because it changes the point of energetic emission that originates from that world. Everything you hold mentally and emotionally begins to take form. Prayer does not create something from nothing. It releases what already exists in the spiritual realm and draws it into the physical realm through vibrational affinity. It is like tuning a radio signal. You are not inventing the music, you are simply tuning into it. And once you are on the right frequency, the music flows. That is why it is essential to understand that prayer is not an attempt to alter the external directly. It is not about saying, "I want this person to change," or "I want my boss to do this," or "I want such and such to appear." That would be dealing with the effect. True prayer goes to the root. It declares, "I am now a perfect channel of divine provision." It affirms, "The peace of God fills this situation." It visualizes, "Spiritual order is manifest here and now." And by doing this, the cause is restructured, and the effect must align. The change may be immediate or gradual. It may come as an intuition, as an unexpected opportunity, as a meeting, or as a quiet resolution. But it will come because the law always responds. Prayer does not need witnesses to be effective. Many of the greatest transformations occur in the invisible, until one day what seemed impossible becomes normal. There was no noise, no signs, no external intervention. Just sustained prayer, elevated consciousness, certainty without pressure, and that is enough. If you pray and still do not see results, do not change your declaration. Affirm with more depth. Do not try to pray louder. Pray more clearly. Do not measure prayer by the minutes it lasts, but by the vibrational charity it reaches. A true word spoken from the soul is more powerful than 100 phrases repeated without understanding. Prayer changes the visible world because the visible world is nothing more than a reflection. When you change the mirror, the image changes. When you clean the glass, more light enters. When you elevate your thought, the dents dissolves and then the body heals, the relationship transforms, the provision appears, and the path clears. Not as a result of effort, but as a natural response to a new consciousness. This is not an empty promise. It is a living spiritual law, an eternal principle acting with precision. And when you pray, you align yourself with that law. By aligning yourself, you become the cause, and as the cause, you see your world change, not from struggle, but from the silent power of a mind that has remembered its unity with God. Chapter 14, When There Is No Answer, Silence, Divine Timing, and True Trust. Every soul that sincerely walks the spiritual path will, sooner or later, encounter the apparent silence. You pray with devotion, affirm with faith, visualize clearly, and yet nothing seems to move. The situation persists, the problem continues, and change does not come. This is one of the most delicate moments on the path, when prayer does not receive a visible response. Yet it is also one of the most sacred moments, because in that apparent void, true trust is nurtured. It is not that God does not respond, God always responds. The Spirit does not remain silent out of neglect or punishment, but its language is not always the one the mind expects, and its timing does not always align with the ego's schedule. Therefore, when there is no answer, do not doubt the law. Deepen your faith. Jesus knew this. He did not teach us to pray and then check the clock. He taught us to plant the seed and then wait with certainty like the gardener who knows the land. He said, when you pray, believe that you have already received it. That is the key. Pray and then know, pray and rest, pray and continue living as one who already has in their soul what they do not yet see with their eyes. Silence does not mean the absence of an answer. Many times it means the soul is being fine-tuned, prepared, and restructured internally to be able to hold what has been requested. It is not enough to desire something. One must have the consciousness to receive it, and that consciousness sometimes requires time to mature. God does not deny, God does not withhold, God ordains, and his order is not ours. It is wiser, broader, more loving. When it seems there is no response, the answer may actually be coming from a direction you have not yet recognized. Sometimes it manifests first in character, not in circumstance. First in understanding, not in result. First in inner peace, not in external change. The Spirit works from the inside out, not from the outside in. If you pray and do not see, do not stop praying, but do not pray from anxiety. Pray from the certainty that the good is already on its way. Affirm not to accelerate, but to keep your mind aligned with the truth. Visualize not to demand, but to maintain the channel open. Then live, trust, rest, and surrender. For faith that needs to see is not faith. True faith rests in God even when the path is shrouded in fog. Sometimes the apparent delay is protection. Sometimes what has been requested does not align with the highest good, and the law knows this. Other times the desire is just, but there are pieces moving, circumstances aligning, and channels opening. And this requires sacred time, not because God is slow, but because manifestation in the physical realm requires specific conditions, and the law is preparing the ground. True trust is looking at the clock and not worrying. It is receiving a no that seems apparent and not giving up. It is listening to the silence and not interpreting it as abandonment. It is knowing that even when nothing seems to happen, everything is happening in the invisible, and sooner or later the form will respond. Remember, the most powerful seed grows in silence. The deepest root makes no noise. The dawn is not announced with noise, it simply appears. And so is God's answer, precise, loving, perfect, though it may come without announcement, though it may come by another path, though it may come in a way you did not imagine. Do not confuse silence with denial. It is possible that the universe is asking you for trust, not insistence, surrender, not repetition, gratitude, not anxiety. And if you can remain at peace, even when nothing changes, then prayer has worked in you, and that inner transformation is the guarantee that the outer world has already begun to move. For everything that is affirmed with faith, everything that is sown with pure intention, everything that is sustained with love bears fruit, perhaps not today, perhaps not as you expected, but always according to the perfect plan of the Spirit, who never forgets, never delays, and never leaves a prayer unanswered. Who prays from the soul? Chapter 15, Becoming the Prayer, the Soul as the Living Temple of the Word. There comes a point on the spiritual path where prayer ceases to be something done and becomes something that you are. It is no longer about isolated moments apart from life or practices reserved for times of need. It is a transfiguration of the soul, a state in which the entirety of your being aligns so deeply with the truth that every thought, every word, every action becomes embodied prayer. To become the prayer is to consciously take on your divine identity. It is to recognize that you do not merely pray. You are the living channel through which the word becomes flesh. It is to understand that the temple is not in a building or at a scheduled time. The temple is you, and the altar is your consciousness. In that temple, the word, the creative vibration, lives, moves, and has its being. When prayer reaches its fullness, the soul has understood that it no longer needs to ask or even strive because it lives in the very state it once sought. It no longer says, "I am peace," because it is peace. It no longer repeats, "I am abundance," because abundance flows from me. In the way it thinks, serves, and exists, it no longer declares, "I am healthy," because its energy, language, and gaze vibrate with the health of the spirit. This does not mean human perception, but spiritual coherence. Continuous prayer has sculpted character, purified thoughts, silenced the tongue, and refined gestures. Then, without needing to proclaim itself holy or appear virtuous, the soul becomes presence, and that presence prays without speaking, blesses without touching, heals without imposing, inspires without forcing, because it has remembered its origin and lives from it. To become the prayer is to live in continuous unity with God. It is to make decisions from the light, to look at others from the soul, to walk the world as an ambassador of the kingdom. It is to be a living witness to the invisible, to allow every action to reveal a higher principle, to cook with love, to work with gratitude, to speak with purity, to breathe with awareness. And thus, without seeking it, transform the environment. In this state, there is no longer a need to pray for results because the soul has understood that results are the natural reflection of being. Prosperity is not sought, it is abundance. Healing is not pursued, it is life flowing. Love is not asked for, it is loved as the inevitable expression of being. Jesus was that embodied prayer. He did not need long invocations. His mere presence was order, clarity, authority, and compassion. And you, made in the image and likeness of that same Spirit, are called to the same. Not to imitate his form, but to embody the same principle. For this you have prayed, for this you have affirmed, visualized, forgiven, and trusted. Not only for things to change, but for you to transform into the visible expression of the eternal Word. When the soul reaches this point, prayer becomes breath. Each inhalation is a silent affirmation, each exhalation a loving surrender. In this flow, the personal self dissolves, and only God lives through you as you. To become the prayer is not the final goal, it is the glorious beginning of a simpler, deeper, truer way of existing, not separate from the world, but transparent in the midst of it, not escaping life, but revealing its highest dimension. From there you bless effortlessly, create without anxiety, serve without losing peace. This is the destiny of the soul that has understood, not to make more prayers, but to be the prayer, to be the channel, to be the temple, to be the voice, to be the word. And from that identity, to live as a living response, as active presence, as embodied peace. For the purpose was not only that you would change your life, but that you would become a new life. Then the soul stops seeking miracles because it has become a miracle. It no longer asks for light. It is the lamp. It no longer cries out for love. It is the embrace. It no longer demands signs. It is the way. And the world, when it looks at you without knowing why, will feel that it has prayed without words because it will have touched God in you.